what we're going to do today is we are going to look at several famous paintings. We are going to do visual analyses of these paintings. And then after we complete these visual analyses, we're going to read Ekphrastic poems. And then we're going to do a little bit of a compare and a contrast between the message, the emotional meaning of the painting, and then the message and the emotional meaning of the poem. So the first painting that we have is Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. I'm sure that you are all familiar with this, right? Yeah, this is something that we see everywhere. We go to the mall and we see this on t-shirts. We go to our friend's house and we see this on a poster on the wall. This is something very common. It's very present within pop culture. Now, when doing a visual analysis of a painting, what you do is you just pick out different objects within the work. And I might turn the lights down, dim them a bit, just so we can see it a little bit better. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. The colors are much more vibrant. So anyway, when you're doing a visual analysis of a painting, what you want to do is you want to look at the painting and ask yourself, what is in this painting? And then after you identify the different things in the painting, then ask, what is their relation to each other? How does each of these things relate? How do they interact? So on and so forth. So when doing a visual analysis, there are 3 things that I notice in this painting. Now, the first thing that I notice is the town. So at the bottom, we have all these houses. We have all these towns. And what I notice about this town is that it's very dark, it's cramped, it's claustrophobic, and it's geometrically tight. Also notice the painting techniques that Van Gogh used to paint the town. You see a lot of bold, straight lines. Bold, sharp, straight lines, all smushed together. These houses look like they're on top of each other. It doesn't look like a place that I would go and enjoy myself. It looks like a place where I would go and I would feel cold, I would feel cramped, I would feel claustrophobic. Yet conversely and contrastingly, look at the sky. The sky is the complete opposite of the town. We see that the sky is not dark, it's not cramped, it's not claustrophobic. Instead, it's illuminated with brilliant lights, it's ever expansive, it's fluid in motion, and it even feels spiritually loose. It feels spiritually free. It's warm, it's inviting. You even notice that his technique, his painting technique with his brush strokes is different from the sky and with the town. Whereas with the town, I said that his lines were very bold and his lines were sharp and his lines were that sharpness kind of invokes pain, right? But on the opposite spectrum, the brushstrokes of the sky are not straight and not sharp. Instead, they're fluid and they're swirling and they're not confining lines. They're not border lines. Instead, they're tones and blends. So there's opposition even in his painting techniques there. Another thing that's interesting to note is that this is a town. So by default, what does that mean? The town means that that is where people live. That is where humans inhabit. Yet conversely, we have the sky. And as we know, humans cannot inhabit the sky. So we have this almost an allusion to the idea that human life is dark, human life is cramped, human life is claustrophobic, whereas conversely, the natural world, the spiritual world, is the exact opposite. It's illuminated, it's ever expansive, it's fluid in motion. Now there is one more thing in this painting. We have this black shape from the bottom, starting at the very bottom of the painting and going all the way up, touching the very top. And you can see that it's very broad at the bottom and it's twisting. It almost looks like flames, but then it narrows down and narrows down and narrows down once it gets to the top, and then those images of flames kind of disappear. Now that is not a fire, but what it is it is a black cypress tree. And what this tree is doing, since it's beginning from the bottom of the painting and touching the very top, it acts as a bridge which connects the two realms together. It's binding these two realms. It's telling us that even though these realms are completely different and opposites of one another, there is a connection between them. There is a way to start at one and end up at the other. Now, with an understanding of Vincent van Gogh's personal life, the painting becomes a visual representation of human suffering. I say that because of the contrast between the town and between the sky. Now, are you guys familiar with the story of Van Gogh's personal life? It's a famous story. It's something that's told over and over and over. And it's very romanticized, highly romanticized nowadays. So right here, we have a self-portrait that Van Gogh painted of himself. And as you can see, he has something on his ear. This is a bandage. The reason why he's wearing a bandage on his ear is because he fell in love with a girl, and she broke his heart. And so he cut his ear off with a pocket knife, and then he put it in a letter, and he mailed his ear to this woman. It's absolutely insane. I have no idea why he would do that. But in the moment, he was so lost. He was so emotionally depressed. His brain just wasn't all there due to his mental illness, that was the thing for him to do. Vincent van Gogh had a crippling depression, and ultimately he killed himself. Another interesting note about his suicide is that when he shot himself, he did not immediately put the gun to his head. That would have ended his life immediately. Instead, what he did is he shot himself in the torso, in the ribs, knowing that he wouldn't die immediately, knowing that he wanted to inflict pain upon himself, that he wanted to suffer and linger for several days. So this is a man that was very sick, very intent on self-harm. And again, now that we know some about his personal life, Starry Night gives us a visual representation of the dark claustrophobia Van Gogh felt on Earth. And it also shows us the brilliant freedom and the escape that he sought within the spiritual world. So going back on the painting, it makes perfect sense as to why where humans inhabit is dark, cramped, claustrophobic, and the spiritual world would be warm, inviting, and free. This is because he is suicidal. And of course, the black cypress tree, it bridges the two realms. So this black cypress tree is saying it represents death. It says that once you die, you can leave this realm and transfer yourself up to this one. So it's kind of crazy because this is a painting that we see everywhere, like I mentioned. We see it in the mall. We see it on t-shirts, everywhere. And when we look at it, it looks like a happy painting. It looks like a welcoming painting. It looks like a warm painting. Yet when you do the analysis of it, you realize that this is not a dark painting. This is almost a call for suicide, a call for self-harm. So it's so interesting. Now, conversely, we're going to look at an ekphrastic poem. We're going to look at an ekphrastic poem which describes Van Gogh's Starry Night, a poem which is in conversation with Van Gogh's Starry Night. So similar to Vincent van Gogh, there was a contemporary poet named Anne Sexton, and she wrote poems detailing her long battle with depression and her ultimate decision to commit suicide. So as you can see, her and Vincent van Gogh are kind of two minds in the same. There's a story that on her last day on Earth, the day that she committed suicide, she met with her book editor, and she had just finished her manuscript for a new book. And she turned that into him, met with him, had lunch. He didn't notice anything was off. And then she went home and she poured a glass of vodka and she went into her garage and sat in her car and just started the car and just sat there until she died of carbon monoxide poisoning. So yeah, and then this is a photograph of her. And again, looking at her, you wouldn't be able to tell. She looks somewhat like someone who's happy, someone who has accomplished things, something with charisma and charm, right? So it just goes to show you don't always know what's going on in people's personal lives. Now, like I said, given that Starry Night is a visual representation of human suffering, Anne Sexton was able to relate to it. Therefore, she wrote an ekphrastic poem in response to Starry Night. And her poem displays how ekphrastic writing can be deeply emotive and deeply personal. At the beginning of class, I said that in your ekphrastic writing, you make physical descriptions of a work of art, and then you also add your emotions to that work of art. Well, it's kind of difficult. It sounds strange. How would I add my emotions to a physical description of something? But her poem is a wonderful example of something that does that. So we're going to go ahead and look at it. So I have her poem on the right. It's a very short poem. As you can see, it's only 3 stanzas long. And then, of course, we have the Vincent van Gogh painting on the other side. So we can kind of compare and contrast, look at the two at the same time. Now, there's an epigraph, and what the epigraph is a direct quote from Vincent van Gogh in a letter to his brother. But I'm not going to pay attention to that for now. I'm just going to go ahead and read the poem. The town does not exist except where one black-haired tree slips up like a drowned woman into the hot sky. The town is silent. The night boils with 11 stars. Oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. It moves, they are all alive. Even the moon bulges in its orange irons to push children like a god from its eye. The old unseen serpent swallows up the stars. Oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. Into that rushing beast of the night, sucked up by that great dragon, to split from my life with no flag, no belly, no cry. So again, that final closing scene is haunting because that is her cry for death, right? Where she's imagining death to be splitting from this life, to be rushing into a beast of the night, to go up into the sky with no belly, no cry. It's a haunting poem, and it's haunting for several reasons. But not only is it haunting, it is in direct conversation with Van Gogh's Starry Night. It's in direct conversation with the analysis that we performed on that poem. Or not on that poem, on that painting. So remember how we talked about the town and what the town represents, and we also talked about the sky and what the sky represents. She continues that motif. So within the opening lines, she has, the town does not exist. Then she goes on to describe the town and say, the town is silent. How she's describing the town is as something that, because there's no life in the town, because no lights are on, because no people are out enjoying themselves, it's almost as if the town does not exist. Because no one is truly living their life to their full potential there, it's almost like a graveyard instead. Then she says the town is silent. So again, she's further driving home that notion that this town does not have life in it, that this town is claustrophobic, that this town is cramped, that this town is a prison. Yet contrastly, she praises the sky just like Vincent van Gogh. She goes, oh, starry, starry night, with an exclamation point there. Then she says, it moves. They are all alive. The moon bulges in its orange irons. So you can see she's doing the same exact thing that Vincent van Gogh was doing, except she's using words to do it. She's not using an image to do it. That goes back to our earlier definition, a verbal representation of the visual. She's using words to describe the visual. So like Van Gogh, again, Sexton sees the radiant movement among the night sky as a sign of life, of spiritual freedom, and she sees the earth as a dark, emotional prison. She admires the sky and she wishes to join it. And of course, this can only be done through death. One can only join the sky through death. And in that final stanza, we have her death scene, her imagined death. So identifying with Van Gogh's depression, Sexton expresses her suicidal ideation with a desire to merge with the sky. We see that in the lines, oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. Now that stands out to me so much because let's say we can't see the words I want to die, and we just see, oh, starry, starry night, this is how. When I read that line, I think it's a nursery rhyme. I'm going to think that this is something for children, right? But then she trumps that idea with the next line, I want to die. Then when I see I want to die, I go, oh, it's not a nursery rhyme. Again, this is using one of the same techniques that we looked at in the poem The Tooth Fairy by Dorian Lonks. Another interesting thing about that line is that it's repeated. So it's right here, oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. But also it's down here, oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. So she is repeating this phrase. In poetry, lines are repeated to stress their importance, and lines are repeated to draw the reader's attention. So when you're working on your poems, if you have something that you really want the reader to pay attention to, if you want something that you kind of feel like is the thesis, the emotional thesis of your poem, you can say it twice. Because when you say it twice, you're drawing our attention to it. And of course, what is her emotional thesis in this poem? Her point is that she wants to join the sky. She wants to die. Again, my apologies for teaching using an example that's so depressing. I didn't really realize it until I'm actually saying it out loud. But So we've talked about in Sexton's poem her references to the town, her references to the sky, but we haven't talked about the cypress tree yet. Now she, like Van Gogh, she also draws attention to the lone cypress tree. We see that within the first stanza. She says, "The town does not exist except where one black-haired tree slips up like a drowned woman into the hot sky." So notice that she describes this cypress tree as a drowned woman. What she's doing here is she's personifying this object, this inanimate object, as female. Well, not inanimate, a tree is something that's alive, but she's personifying this object as something that is female, but she's taking it one step further, and she's describing it as a female who is in distress. And as we know, who is the female in distress that we've met so far? Well, knowing a bit about Anne Sexton's life, we know that she is a female in distress, right? She was depressed. She had suicidal wishes and ideations and whatnot. So given that bit of background information on her life, we're able to know that she is personifying this cypress tree as herself. She is the cypress tree within this poem. Now, within the closing lines, Sexton describes the act of death as a violent split into the sky, into the rushing beast of the night. Because the cypress tree is a physical object splitting and piercing the sky, it can be interpreted that the cypress tree is Sexton herself in the actual act of death, ascending the earth and joining the sky. So again, that final stanza, the death scene is into that rushing beast of the night, sucked up by that great dragon, to split from my life with no flag, no belly, no cry. So I said that the cypress tree is her... we'll just look at this version. So I said that the cypress tree is Anne Sexton's actual act of death. Well, let's look at that. So when I first pointed the cypress tree out, I showed you guys how it's very wide at the bottom and how there are almost these flames coming off at the side. And then as the cypress tree grows, as it progresses up the painting, you can see that it gets narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow until it's only just a sliver at the very top. If the cypress tree is her dying, it would make perfect sense. When she's still down here on the earth, she's alive to some degree, right? So the cypress tree is wide when she's still alive. But as she begins to die, and as her soul begins to dissipate, and as her soul begins to transform into one of these swirls in the sky, her soul the cypress tree is narrowing and narrowing and narrowing because it's her soul kind of floating away. So it's pretty crazy. You know, when you first look at this painting, you don't think there's a lot going on there. You go, okay, a town, whatever that black shape is in the sky. But it's awesome just how much more there is when you just peel back and peel back and peel back. And just kind of in summary of Anne Sexton's poem, this poem mentions physical details from the painting, but the main focus is on the poet's emotional response. Remember, that is the secret, the trick to writing good ekphrastic poetry. Now, rather than dispassionately describing Van Gogh's artwork in detail, Sexton instead, she engages with the art in an emotional level in a highly personal way. Your ekphrastic writing should navigate physical descriptions of an original artwork alongside of your own emotional feelings. So again, that's just another really important point. That's something you should write down. Your ekphrastic writing should navigate physical descriptions of an original artwork alongside of your own emotional feelings. All right, so you guys got a pretty good understanding of Starry Night? All right, we'll go forward and look at the next painting. So this is another very famous painting. This is Gustav Klimt's The Kiss. Are you guys familiar with this? I know this is another painting that is effervescent in pop culture. We see it here and there on t-shirts, on posters, and whatnot. So yeah, again, we're going to do another visual analysis of this painting. And like I said, how do we begin a visual analysis? We do it just by identifying what is in the painting. And after we identify what's in the painting, we form meaning to it. So what we have is a man and a woman. They're in some type of setting. Of course, this is a cliff right here. These are some daisies. It looks almost as if they're in space. They're nowhere in particular. They are not grounded in reality on planet Earth. They are just in some sort of realm. And what's happening is the man is, of course, standing over the woman, crouching over her, holding her head upright, and he is kissing her. The first thing I notice is the texture of their skin. Even though they're not necessarily anatomically correct, these figures, their skin looks almost hyper-realistic. I say that because we can see all the flesh tones. We can see her blushing, right? Her skin isn't perfectly white. Instead, it's kind of muddled, kind of how your skin looks like when your blood's hot and pumping and moving underneath your skin. You can see those tones, those blush tones on your skin. So the skin, to some degree, I would say is hyper-realistic in this painting. Yet contrasting to that, the clothing is the absolute opposite of hyper-realism, right? The clothing is very stylized. That's nothing, it isn't even possible really to wear clothing with such sharp shapes like that. It's not physically possible. So we have this gold fabric clothing the bodies, and the first thing I notice is the designs on the man's clothing. You notice that his clothing is decorated with dark, rigid, and linear rectangles. All these rectangles have negative tones to them. So there's deep, dark grays, deep dark browns, deep dark blacks. And of course, all these rectangles are sharp lines, straight lines, rigid lines, lines that can hurt you, lines that can poke you, lines that can cut. And in stark contrast to the man's rigid lines, the woman's clothing is decorated with bright and soft circles. These circles are a range of colors. There's purple, pink, red, blue, magenta. They're of all different shapes and sizes. They're clustered around with one another. They're just soft. They're inviting. They're reminiscent of the field of poppies, the field of flowers that the lovers are standing on and sitting on. And of course, that field has a nice, inviting, warm tone to it. So this woman is almost being personified like the earth that she's standing on. Now, of course, their clothing is in stark contrast with each other. It's in opposition with each other. The man's clothing is sharp and dark. The woman's clothing is bright and soft. So immediately, the composition of this painting puts these lovers at odds with one another, and it separates themselves. Yet despite this separation, they are physically united due to the fact that they're kissing. They are physically united. The man has his hands around her neck. She has a hand around his neck. He's kissing her. Their bodies are embracing. So despite their separation, they are physically united. But is this unity intrusive? Does this woman want for him to be touching her? Does this woman want for him to be kissing her? This is a debate that's active in the art world, and it will never be solved. It's just kind of a matter of preference and how you read the painting. There are various essays and documentaries just on this one topic. But yeah, let's get to the bottom of it. Let's find out whether this unity is intrusive or if it is welcomed by both parties. So we notice that they're kissing, right? And the man's head is to the side, kind of, but the woman's face is tilted at us, facing us directly. Now, I were to think that if she were to be going along with the kiss, she would not have turned her head. I would have thought that she would have just taken it straight on like that, but she doesn't. She turns her head. And because she's turning her head, it appears to me as if she's turning her lips away from his kiss. It appears to me as if she is resisting his embrace in this exact moment. And of course, to combat this resistance, the man has now placed his large hands on her neck and on her chin. Right? His large hands are on her neck and on her chin. And what he's doing in this moment is he's attempting to exert his physical power over her. She's turning her head to his kiss. She does not want it, and he's trying to correct that. He's trying to tell her, no, I am going to kiss you. The other thing to notice is where the man and the woman are standing. They are standing on the absolute edge of a cliff. The woman, she's on her knees. You can see that because her legs are tilted like that. And her feet are literally dangling over the precipice. Her toes are curling around the flowers. She has absolutely no escape from this man. So because she has absolutely no escape, well, what would escape mean for her? Escape would mean falling off of this cliff. Escape would mean dying. So the only thing that she can do in her power is just submit to him, right? You can see she's just kind of collapsed in defeat, and she's just lying there because she knows that this alternative is better than falling to her death. Another thing that's interesting about the landscape is just, well, why are they standing on the edge of a cliff? And I think my answer is because he's in pursuit of her. He's chased her and chased her and chased her and chased her. And now the pursuit is over and she has literally nowhere else to go. We notice that she's leaning on her knees. She's not standing up like he is. That may be due because of physical exhaustion, just because she cannot run any longer. She cannot support her own weight. But yeah, it's just a very interesting painting. And this painting is huge. I've never really been to a museum ever, but I saw pictures of it online, and I'm pretty sure this painting is like as big as one of these walls or something like that. It's pretty damn big. But so now that we've kind of talked about the painting and we've analyzed the painting and we've asked the question whether the kiss is intrusive or whether the kiss is wanted and welcomed, we have an ekphrastic poem to look at. Now this poem is by a woman named Sasha Pimentel, and she is a contemporary poet. So she's a poet who is alive right now, and she is publishing right now. So I got this poem off of poets.org. Poets.org is a database used for contemporary poetry, where you can go there and read poets and poems being published right now in 2022. So this is an ekphrastic poem, and earlier we talked about the different ways that you can approach an ekphrastic poem. Remember, I had those 4 different ways, and the final step was to place yourself physically within the poem. That's what the poet does. She's going to place herself physically within this poem, and she is going to pretend that she is the woman being kissed. And yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. So the kiss. Do you really think if you bend me, I will love you? You crack my chin up, your hands brown pigeons scheming reunion at my cheek and temple, your jaw cragged at the end of your thick neck of longing. I claw onto you as the only tree here, your swing. I'm mad for gravity, though I'm bound diagonally to you. Let me. Push from your trunk towards the edge in my freedom. Leave me. To wither while moss weeps in the corners, our halo liquid as yolk, waving from our body's heat, our divinity melting. My dress blossoms so loudly. You are still wrestling me closer. If only I could release to you my mouth just this once and you would leave me. But the shadows of your robe are so haphazard. I know you will try to smother me again. The poppies scratch, my feet reach beyond spring. So this is a long poem. The middle stanzas kind of lose me just because she leaves reality there. She creates this metaphor of a tree, and it's just kind of difficult to follow. But in the other stanzas, the lower ones and the first ones, these are wonderful because these mirror expertly that relation and whether or not this kiss is intrusive or not. So again, her poem echoes and confirms the sentiment that the man's embrace is intrusive and that it lacks consent. We see this because the man is described as wrestling the woman closer to him. He cracks her chin into place, and his kiss is described as smothering. So notice that all the instances of physical touch, all the instances of embrace within this poem have a negative connotation associated with them. All the descriptions of touch have negative connotations, right? With wrestling, cracking, the kiss is smothering. So physically overpowered, the woman cannot resist from this man. And because of this, she just resigns to the kiss, exhausted, stating, if only I could release to you my mouth just this once and you would leave me. when she says that, what she means is, I don't have the energy to keep running from him anymore. I can't do this anymore. But maybe if I just kiss him this one time, if I just let him win this one time, he might leave me alone forever, right? So we see her motive in the kiss is not that she wants to do this. It's just out of exhaustion. She really has no other option. Well, she does have one other option. Her option is to fall from the cliff. But of course, that would mean death. So I wouldn't really call that an option. Something else that I really like is this poem picks up on the notion that the flowers on the woman's dress echo the flowers of the hill they're standing on. We see that with just this simple sentence. My dress blossoms loudly. In 4 words, she's able to make that connection between the dress and between the flowers. That's pretty cool. She also addresses the man's clothing as well. The shadows of your robe are so haphazard. We have shadows, something negative, something evil, haphazard. There's danger associated with that. So it's cool how she's physically addressing the colors at play, the patterns at play within that poem, as well as the debate whether the kiss is intrusive or not. But yeah, this is just another great example of an ekphrastic poem. We have one more poem, and then we're going to have some really cool writing prompts for today. So this is a photograph from the Vietnam War. And on the right, we have a poem by a man named Marc Levy. Now, Marc Levy is actually in this photograph himself. He is standing right here. He's hovering over this woman. So before we look at the poem, I'll tell you some of the background story behind this photograph. So in the far left, we see smoke, yellow smoke rising. In war, the term to pop smoke means to have a canister, you pull the pin from it, and smoke rises from it. And they're smoke signals, basically. So a helicopter flying over will see that smoke, and then the helicopter will fly towards it. Now, if you have yellow smoke, that means there's an injury, someone's dying. If you have, say, blue smoke, that might mean we need a resupply, we need more ammunition, we need more food. So different colored smokes have different meaning to them. So as you can see, there is yellow smoke that has been popped. So that means someone is injured, someone's dying, we need help, get here right now. Now the story behind this this photograph is pretty incredible. So Marc Levy, he was in Vietnam in 1971 and 1972. That's right towards the end of the war. We only have 1 year left, and so we basically know at that point that we're going to lose the war. And he was a combat medic within the 1st Air Cavalry. A combat medic is a very interesting job because you are a soldier, you have a rifle, you are going into the jungle hunting the enemy, yet you also carry bandages on you, you carry sutures on you, you carry morphine on you. So simultaneously, your job is not only to kill, but your job is to save. So there's this very strange contradiction within his identity, and it's very hard for him to grapple with that, to come to terms with that. How do I kill and save lives at the same time? Now, soldiers in Vietnam, they would go on patrol. And when they go on patrol, they wouldn't just go into the jungle for 1 day and then come back to base. What they would do is they would load their backpacks up with 100 pounds of gear, and they would hike into the jungle, and they would sleep in the jungle for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month at a time. And when they're in the jungle, they're just hoping and praying that they can encounter the enemy. They don't know where the enemy is because Vietnam is a war where there's no defined enemy. So they're just out there combing the jungle. They're in the enemy's backyard looking for him. So because they're in the jungle for such long periods of time, they are never safe. The enemy could be anywhere at any moment. And so a ritual that soldiers would perform just to be able to sleep at night is they would huddle up together. And they would sit with all of their backs together. That way everyone can look out and everyone's watching around themselves in 360 degrees. And then someone would go out there and they'd take something called commo wire and string a giant circle of it around where they're sleeping. And then they would dangle grenades in the commo wire and claymore mines and other traps. And so the story behind this photograph is that the men were trying to sleep, and in the middle of the night, their commo wire exploded and it ripped. Just a loud explosion, ripped everyone awake, And so now these men are sitting there in the dark knowing that 30 yards away people are on the way trying to kill us. And they hear screaming for the entirety of the night until daylight comes. They just listen to a woman's voice, a woman screaming, crying, calling out in another language for help. So in the morning, the soldiers, they got their rifles ready and they walked out into the jungle and they looked, and there were several dead men, dead enemies. They had weapons on them, rifles on them, and there was also a dead woman. Now the woman was a soldier too. In Vietnam, there were child soldiers, woman soldiers, and so on and so forth. So this was a woman soldier, except she was not dead. Instead, her legs had just been destroyed. And so she was the voice that they heard all night, crying and screaming. And so Marc Levy, being the combat medic, the person whose job is to save lives, he walks forward to her and he's looking at her. You can see her laying down. He's left with this decision: do I save her or do I kill her? And the most haunting part about this photograph, I'm going to come over here. It's super blurry, so you can't see it very well. But you can make out that that's a head, correct? And then this is an arm, and the arm is reaching up at him, and the arm is reaching up asking for help. And exactly where the arm is reaching up, there's a canteen. And of course, what is in a canteen? Water is in a canteen. And what is water? Water is something that replenishes, nourishes, saves life. At the end of the day, water is the equivalent to life. So she is physically reaching out to him, asking for her life, right? Asking for help in this situation. So this is the photograph, and then 20 or 30 years went by, and one of Marc Levy's old army buddies mailed this photograph to him. He never knew that this photograph existed. And so upon looking at this photograph, he wrote this poem. And even though this isn't not painting or anything, it still counts as an ekphrastic poem because we are looking at an image, we are making several observations about this image, physical descriptions of the image, and then we're adding emotional weight to them. So I know that was a very long, convoluted story, but I'm going to go ahead and read the poem. In the breeze, the sudden quiver and sway, the shadow of bamboo leaves, twirling onto the hot, dry earth. The squad standing quiet over the stiffening man, made headless by the machine gun team. Weapons and water scattered about, the twice-shot girl reaching for my canteen. What to do? What? I patch her wounds, splint her legs with rotted bamboo. There is the sudden sound of yellow smoke. The medevac dips, kicks out a litter. We lift her up, they haul her in. Beneath the whirling blade, she is spinning, spinning, she is floating away. So we have that moment where he is standing over her. She's wounded. She's reaching for his canteen, and he's asking himself, what do I do in this situation? This is the person that I'm out here to kill. Do I kill them or do I help them? And ultimately, he decides to help her. I patch her wounds, splint her legs with rotted bamboo. And then the ending might get a little convoluted if you're not familiar with some of this language, but I already explained what yellow smoke is. But a medevac is basically a helicopter that uses to take injured people to a hospital. So a medevac would be like an ambulance. A litter is what the ambulance helicopter sends down that you would put the person in, that you would put the wounded person in, and then the helicopter would haul them up. So it's so interesting because, again, the final lines are, the medevac dips, kicks out a litter. We lift her up, they haul her in. Beneath the whirling blade, she is spinning, spinning, she is floating away. So, of course, they made the decision to save this woman's life. He treated her on the spot. They loaded her up. They're putting her into the medevac helicopter. So we know that her life is safe. Her life is secure. She's going to make it through this. Yet she is described in a way as if she is floating up into the sky. Of course, she's described that way because that's what's literally happening. She's being lifted up from the helicopter and pulled into the helicopter. But she's described as spinning, spinning, she is floating away. When we think of someone as dying, when we think of the soul, we think of the soul as rising up to the sky. We think of the soul as something that kind of dissipates and floats away. So it's so interesting because grounded in reality, she's being lifted into the sky because her life is going to be saved. But we're able to interpret it, and the connotation has that that image of her being risen into the sky echoes a spirit leaving a body and floating away and trailing off into the sky. So again, this is just a great poem. I really enjoy war poems. That's actually my favorite genre to read, war literature, war poems. Marc Levy, he has a website. It's called Medic in the Green Time. If anyone's interested, you can check his website out. It's called Medic in the Green Time. And he just has a blog. Every week he posts new stuff on there. What he primarily does is just goes through his collection of photographs from the war and scans them and uploads them, and then just types stories or poems explaining those things. But yeah, very, very interesting. So we are about to do our prompts. So I have a few paintings selected for you guys. And before we look at the paintings, I just want you to review what are the 4 ways that you can write an ekphrastic poem. So of course, the first way you can write an ekphrastic poem is by describing the experience you are feeling in looking at an artwork. And that's pretty straightforward. The second thing you can do is tell the story of what's happening in the artwork by describing the work in detail. The third thing that you can do is adopt the perspective of the artist and pretend that you're the artist and write from their mindset. And the fourth thing that you can do is put yourself inside a painting and describe what you see around you and describe what brought you here. Does everyone pretty much have that down? Okay. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a few paintings I've selected, and we'll just spend the next 10-15 minutes just using these as writing prompts. So over here I have a Rene Magritte painting, and that painting is so interesting because these are 2 people embracing, they're kissing. Of course, as we know, kissing is something that's so intimate, right? So personal, yet their identities are shielded from one another. They are strangers, even though they're engaged in such an intimate act. Another poem I have is a David Hockney painting. I love this poem because it just kind of screams Southern California, right? It's just kind of a happy-go-lucky painting. That is the moment that someone has jumped into the water. In the middle, I have a painting of Thomas Chatterton. Thomas Chatterton is referred to as the Kurt Cobain of like the 17th century. I say that because Thomas Chatterton, he was a poet, and he got a lot of success for his poetry, and then he absolutely hated that success. And so what he did is he destroyed all of his poems. So you can see ripped up papers right here, all of his torn up poems. And then after destroying his body of work, he killed himself. He drank poison, and he died. Again, that kind of echoes Kurt Cobain's story. Someone who grew up, who blew up, got fame, did not want that fame, and ultimately a suicide was involved. On the far right, I have a watercolor painting by Claggett Wilson. Claggett Wilson was a soldier in World War I, and he was wounded in Verdun, and he started painting in a rehabilitation hospital. And his paintings are absolutely incredible. So here's a Claggett Wilson of a soldier who has lost their arm. And the cool thing about this is you notice that his arm, it's very defined up here, but once the arm is lost, the arm kind of blends into the background. It mystifies into the background. So it's almost saying is kind of ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We come from this earth and we will return to this earth. That's cool. And of course we have Frida Kahlo. Everyone knows Frida Kahlo. She was actually had an art exhibit in Raleigh, in 2019, I think. So yeah, a lot of us are familiar with Frida Kahlo. She's a surrealist, so this is a self-portrait. She painted 2 of herself. She painted one version of herself wearing traditional Victorian European clothing, and she painted another version of herself wearing traditional Mexican clothing. And so it's the duality between the crisis that she feels and having kind of a split identity and what people want from her and what she wants for herself. The middle painting is probably the most famous painting up here, and I have no idea what the title of it is. It's just something I've seen my whole life. I'm pretty sure this painting is actually in an episode of SpongeBob too. So it's super famous. I'm sure you guys have seen it before. But yeah, these are just all the different paintings. They're pretty fun. I tried to get a diverse collection. But yeah, just write an ekphrastic poem. Look back at the list of the 4 ways you can write an ekphrastic poem. Choose a poem and just try and get something down. And also, if you don't like these poems, That's completely fine. You can. There's millions of paintings in the world. You can